Richard.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
You're not on, or you got to get closer.
Testing. Don't tell my wife you can turn me off that easily. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Town of Wolfeboro Zoning Board of Adjustment. We have two matters for this evening, and will the clerk read the first one? Initially, I'd like to point out we only have 4 members tonight. Is that okay with you to proceed with just 4 members? Mr. Colkerd will not be able to make it. Okay. The clerk, please read the notice of meeting.
Case number 03-V-19, application Jared Burke and West Burke. Public hearing for a variance under Article 23, Section 175-144B and Article 10, Section 175-70C of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow for the renovation of an existing barn to allow for 2 additional residential units. This property is located at 112 North Main Street. A site visit was held today at 4:05 with Fred Chadeshi, Tim Cronin, and Sarah Silk. Copies were sent to all the appropriate town offices along with all the abutters.
Thank you. Who appears for the...
Mr. Chairman, I would just ask that you note the letter of withdrawal on case 01-V-19 that was related to this property. I would just ask that you note that for the record.
Okay, please note that for the record. So this is a de novo hearing on this application. Who appears for the applicant? I recognize you.
Good evening, members of the board. Mr. Chairman, my name is Philip Marbury from the law offices of Marbury & Marbury, here on behalf of Wes and Jared Burke, the applicants in this petition. As you all know, we addressed the points of the variance request, all 5 of them, in great detail at the last hearing last month. Since that time, just to bring the members of the public up to speed who are here as well, we did withdraw that application and resubmit a new one in order to address a few technical issues with the process from the town's perspective and from the application, from the permitting originally all the way through this application, just to make sure that all of the gaps that may have existed there were closed up and that it was a consistent and thorough application to make sure that we covered all of those bases. We also added and I'll address this in a little more detail as I talk through the 5 points. A request for a variance for an additional provision, Article 10, Section 175-70C, which is a variance for the distance between buildings that must exist. As you know from being at the site, the distance between the existing barn that we're seeking the variance for so that we can convert that into a duplex or 2 more additional units, and the existing structure, the 4-unit structure there, is within, it's narrower than the ordinance allows for a new structure to be built. Now, we are requesting a variance to that. I do believe that it is arguable, and this board could decide that no variance is actually even required for that by nature of it being grandfathered in, because it's an already existing structure with no plans for expansion, no plans for change, right? The only thing that potentially would make it need a variance, which is why we're going to go ahead and request it so that the board can decide whether they want to go the route of granting the variance to it or deciding that it's grandfathered and no variance is needed, is that if it is there as a garage currently, then it would not be in violation of the ordinance, and changing it from a garage to any other structure would thereby invoke a change, and it would need to be accepted under the variance or under the zoning ordinance. I don't believe it has been a garage or used as a garage for a long time. It's a barn, and it was used historically as a barn, never as a garage. So there is an argument that it's grandfathered in as a structure other than a garage that's already within that minimum distance. And so we're going to request it both ways. The board could decide no variance is needed, but we are going to formally request a variance if the board decides it is necessary. In the interest of time, I think that I will approach especially the first 4 prongs of the 5-prong test by incorporating by reference the remarks and comments and arguments that were made at the last hearing, because they are all wholesale applicable, and I think that'll save you all some time, save everybody here some time. We remain open to questions about any of them, but between the documentation submitted and the comments that were made previously, I don't want to just beat kind of on something that's already been thoroughly established. With that, I do want to address a few additional notes specific to element 5, which is the undue hardship element. And that's, again, as we talked about last time, it's kind of the linchpin of most of these variance applications. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is what typically an applicant has to establish, because this is really the most difficult element of the test. And as I've stated before, and as I've stated in the documentation, I believe the other 4 elements are very easily met here. I don't think that there's any substantial argument that this violates the spirit of the ordinance or that it's contrary to public interest. It's a logical, reasonable adaptation of the property as it exists, and it's just an improvement thereon without any real downsides to it. Now, we do need to address this 5th element, and in doing so, again, I want to add to what was argued last time in articulating a little more clearly that what this board's job is to ascertain under this element is whether there are certain special circumstances unique to this property that warrant a change, that warrant a variation or an exception to the existing ordinance. And I argue that there is. And the members of the board can take into account all of these special circumstances. It is a very unique property in that it is already granted previously a variance to be a 4-unit building on the structure. Now, it's easy, and last month, Mr. Hausman argued that actually makes it more difficult and makes it something that this board should weigh against it. But that is one of the special conditions of this property that really weigh in favor of granting the variance, because it helps establish and demonstrate that this barn is increasingly out of place in the context of the greater property, in the use of the greater property, and therefore warrants a granting of the variance in order to bring the rest of the property up to its best use. The existence of a barn for agriculture, it has no place in this particular district, and particularly right next to 4 residential units where tenants are living and reside. And so again, that's one of the special circumstances of this property that establish the need for the granting of this variance, that it would cause an undue hardship, because that is one of the circumstances that make it very difficult to use this barn for any other real purpose, any other beneficial purpose. And so I would just add that it is something this board can consider. The totality of the circumstances here, the totality of everything that exists on this property, uniquely make it where there's very little else that can be done. As I spoke with my clients, there's a few things that could happen. One, because the barn can't be used for any beneficial purpose, it just continues to degrade and eventually has to be torn down, which I believe, and I think you would agree, would be a real shame, because it's a beautiful barn. With this renovation, would be restored to be just increasingly well maintained and maintain the character and nature of this increasingly historic part of Wolfeboro, right? As we've talked about before, the plans for the structure itself are seeking to do minimal change. They're going to have to add some windows, and they're going to have to do a few other things to make sure that they're up to code, which they're going to obviously do. But they're seeking to maintain the facade, maintain the visual appeal of that barn. And I think that that's a real great value to Wolfeboro, where if they cannot put this to any beneficial purpose, then eventually that barn is going to have to come down, because it's going to just increasingly fall apart. And so that all speaks to the fact that this is a property with unusual circumstances. This is a property where a denial of this variance is going to cause an undue hardship, and the change that they are seeking to do is a very reasonable one, because this is already increasingly an area of Wolfeboro that is used for multifamily residential dwelling. It's something we need more of in Wolfeboro, as we've discussed previously. And this is already a property that's situated for it. Instead of going to more properties and converting more of them to cause this elsewhere, elsewhere, right? The more I think that we can keep it in consistent uses within these areas, I think that that's a benefit to Wolfeboro itself. And so by increasing this from 4 units up to 6, we already meet the parking requirements, which Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we have confirmed legal opinion that 8 parking spaces would be required with 6 units total. There are currently 8 parking spaces, so we don't run afoul or run into issues with that particular issue either. And so we're simply trying to bring this up to date. We're trying to take something that right now is a waste and bring it into its highest and best use by allowing this to be converted into 2 additional units. And this gets, again, I spoke briefly last month about the big picture of zoning ordinances, and the reason that this 5th prong is here is because the courts are very concerned that zoning ordinance would become kind of arbitrary and unreasonable takings of property. That they would remove the ability for people to do what they should be able to do with their property. And again, when we look at this structure, we've already got the structure. No changes are going to be made there. It's already within that minimum distance. So the variance that we're seeking to, avoid that minimum distance, if the board decides that's necessary, isn't causing a change of anything substantial. It's simply saying, yes, you can bring this to a better use without running afoul of those things. So all things considered, this is a reasonable use. It's an eminently reasonable use, and one that we do not believe runs. Let me restate that. And one that is necessary in order to avoid the undue hardship that my clients, the petitioners, would face if this variance is refused. You've been to the property already, and you know that they obtained a permit some time ago in the last few years in order to restructure the foundation because it was starting to cave in. These are tenants these are owners that want to do the right thing with this property. And it would be a real shame to put all of their work that was already permitted and approved essentially to waste if they're unable to do anything further with this property. And so I stand ready for any additional questions that you might have, but again, bringing in and incorporating what was articulated last month, I think in some ways the best approach tonight is brevity. And so I avail myself of any questions you may have, Mr. Chairman and members of the board.
Thank you. Questions for Marbury? We reserve the right to recall you.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of the variance request?
Hello, my name is Jared Burke. I'm one of the owners of 112 North Main Street, and I was just wanted to go through a few things. I mean, the barn it's a unique property, and everyone drives by it every day. I mean, it's kind of something that's always been part of Wolfeboro, and we want to keep it, looking like a nice part of Wolfeboro. So I don't think it'll detract from any visible site. I think it'll actually increase what I guess the value, or it'll look nice just with what we want to keep the historical part and keeping the barn door and keeping the shape and everything, and so we just want to have what we have and make it nicer visually. Also, I mean, I live in 104 North Main Street, which is a little bit further down, and it's a building that I own and live in. And also, I live right next to, there's the condos, which has a lot of units, I mean, residences. And for me, I don't think it has ever been an issue for me with neighbors or cars or anything like that. So it's, I mean, seeing what they have, and I know it's grandfathered and everything, but for me, I don't feel that it's a burdensome on me or anything, or hopefully it's not on anyone else. But it's nice to, I mean, if someone's in these apartments, they're living and working, and they're part of the community. They're teachers. I mean, we have teachers living there, and clergy, and business owners. I mean, in my place, I had police officers living there, and so they're all, I mean, contributing members of society, and it's something that I mean, there'll be less cars parking in town. They can walk to work if they're, which is nice, and thank you for your time in this matter. Thank you.
I'm Wes Burke. I'm the other half of the owners. I realize nobody knows me. I've lived in town, and I live on Tufton Neck for 46 years. I have 4 children. They've gone through all the school system here. They're all college graduates, and they all work in town. My daughter taught school at the middle school, and she now lives in Elliott near Portsmouth. But my 3 sons all live in Tuftonboro and Wolfeboro. They're all businessmen in town. They employ people in town. They are good people. We mean what we say. We want to make this building beautiful, historic, and usable in this community. We know the community needs housing. Only 2, but it is 2. It makes a difference. I don't know what we'd do with the building if we didn't do this. I don't want to see it deteriorate. Not where it is. You've seen barns everywhere and what happens to old barns. The roofs get holes. This has a hole right now. Rob Hausman's tree, the top broke off and landed on the roof, and it has a hole in the roof from his tree. He doesn't know about it, but I probably should tell him. But barns fall apart, and unless they're maintained and taken care of. And we want to take care of this one. It has an important part in town, historical part of town. It's a nice part of town, and we want to maintain that as a nice part of town. That's about all. Philip talked on the points. Great, I believe what he said. And thank you for this time.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak in favor of the applicant? Please come and speak in the microphone and identify yourself, please. Thank you.
My name is Benjamin Pease. I looked for housing in Wolfeboro about a year ago, and I couldn't find any housing for me and my wife, so we actually are now in Tuftonboro. It would be nice, though, to be in Wolfeboro and closer, so that the business that we're starting, we could have employed people here in Wolfeboro, but instead we started the business down in Waltonboro. So it would be nice if we had some more housing, because obviously the amenities in Wolfeboro are much nicer. I've seen the barn. The barn looks really nice inside. They look like they're doing a good job to restore it. And I would just hate to see a historical structure get destroyed and kind of lose that character of the town. When I drive through New Hampshire, it's sad to see all these buildings that have been around for 100+ years and see them decaying and falling apart and losing kind of that historical feeling. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak in favor of the application? Anyone wish to speak against the application? Don't be shy. We don't bite.
My name is Becky Swafield. I live on 7 Pleasant Street. And we've lived here for a long time, and we own a business, and we employ people. And we bought a home in the residential district. And when we moved to Pleasant Street, it was a pretty quiet street, and every home was owned by someone who lived there. And I can't say that now. there's a house on the opposite corner that is owned by people from out of state, and they, I don't know if they're renting to people outside the family, but different family members come up and use the place. And the people next door to me on the Wolfeboro Inn side, we've had 3 or 4 different owners since we moved there. Right now, nobody's living in the house. People across the street go to Florida for the winter. I feel like, yes, there is a barn on the property, and there's many properties in residential districts with barns. But just because you buy the property doesn't mean that you're entitled to get the maximum amount of money out of the property. Our zoning ordinance allows for conversion of 4 units per house, and they have 4 units per house. And they knew what the zoning was before they invested in the foundation. And I don't know if there's been any improvement on the interior of the barn. I know they were denied a building permit in December, but there's not enough parking there. You're going to need, you don't have enough parking now. And when you think of 2 extra units and then people who visit those people and the effect that it has, not just on the abutters on either side, but the people on Pleasant Street, which is parallel. I mean, the Burkes own the property directly in back of me on North Main Street, and they take good care of the property, but it's a huge difference from when there was just an owner there. And I realize that there aren't many people who want to just live in a big house like we have on North and South Main Street, and I realize that there might be better uses, but I think that they have maximized the use on that property. And there also is another reasonable use for that barn, which to me, I have served on the Board of Adjustment, and I remember one time we had a case that went to court, and there was another reasonable use for the property allowed by zoning. And that barn, now with a new foundation, could be used to relieve the parking problem that they have. They could have 2 parking places in the barn, or maybe not 2, but at least 1, and storage. So there is a reasonable use for the property. And I just feel like especially with Airbnbs and no control over that, and just totally through the Board of Adjustment, you know, allowing uses other than residential in the residential district is changing the character of the town, and it's making people who bought in a residential district for residential use feel like they're not protected. And when you take a house and turn it into apartments, it's a commercial use. And it's a big change, and I think that it should be denied, and I don't think there's a hardship because they knew what they were getting when they bought the property. And as I said, there's a reasonable use for the barn. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Caulfield? I had one question for you, ma'am, if I might. You mentioned that there are other barns in the area. Since you live in that area, could you tell us what they're used for? Could you come back up to the mic, please? Yeah, would you come back up to? Yeah.
I didn't do a survey. I know that on the other side of North Main Street, there's a home, a single-family home, and there's a barn attached. I don't know what they use the barn for. Some people prior had horses there. I know the former Higley property has a small barn, and it was used as a workshop and an art studio. You know, there are many uses for a barn, and to say that's the only use and it would be a hardship for the owners when they know what the zoning is, I think, I just don't agree with that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I got a point of clarification from Matthew.
Sure.
Matt, I know we've gone back and forth on this, I've heard it from different points of view. Does the ordinance say there's 4 units per building or 4 units per property?
The ordinance says 4 units per building, but the density still applies, overarching above that 4 units per building. But that's what the ordinance says.
So,
I'm not sure I had addressed that with the board actually previously, but that is the case.
okay.
And the density is 2 units per acre?
Do we consider those 2 distinct buildings? Because What does the town consider those currently?
Because the buildings are separated and they're seeking the building separation variance, we would call them two distinct buildings.
Thank you.
And again, to be clear, there was a claim made at a prior meeting that it also violated the section that you're referring to, Luke. I do not believe that it does violate that section, limiting to 4 units per building. If we were proposing 7 units in one building, that would be where that issue we'd run into that, and we're not dealing with that here. Oh, no question. I'm agreeing that the density still applies and a variance is needed from that, but the cap of units per building is not something that a variance is required for here. But the density per acre absolutely is a problem.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak in opposition to the application?
I just have a question. I'm Janet Vaughn. I live on North Main Street. And I'm just questioning about the parking. It just seems like, did I read that, how many cars can they have up there? Well, and like someone said, if you have company, then there's going to be more cars, and where are they going to go? In the summertime, they'll probably end up in front of my house, which is fine, because there's parking spots in front of mine, but in the winter, where are they going to go? I mean, I can hardly get out of my driveway now with the snow. So that's my concern is the parking. The barn's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I look at it every time, and I love it. I am a barn person, but I'm just worried about the parking getting in and out of there and the density on them.
It's an excellent question, and I would not argue that our parking standards are perfectly written, nor are they practical in the downtown area. I think that's something that the planning board has put on its work plan for this year. But the parking standards are met with the 8 existing spaces on site. Our parking standards require only 1 space per unit plus 1 space as a visitor space, essentially, for every 3 units. So in this case, there's a requirement for 8 spaces. The 1979, I believe, special exception required 8 spaces, and therefore the parking standard is met with the parking on site. But again, I'm not arguing that our parking standards are necessarily the most practical approach. I think they should be revisited, but I think this is an excellent example of something that meets it, but may not be a practical approach to parking on the site.
Matt, I have a question for you also. When you look at 4 units that are there now on a quarter of an acre, are there any other situations that are similar to that in that area of Wolfeboro?
I'm not sure if there are 4 or 6 units on a quarter acre, although there may be some condo conversions just up the road. There are 4 units on a quarter acre, but the 6 unit on a quarter acre I don't think is achieved anywhere else in that adjacent area.
Thank you.
Yeah, not to my knowledge at least.
Except for maybe families in transition.
Yeah, but again, we're talking families in transition is not a quarter acre lot. Yeah, it's a quarter acre lot. That's one of the differences here. It's such a small lot that I think it makes it unique from other situations.
Anyone else wish to speak in opposition and occupy?
I just wanted to mention, I know he said that there's 1 unit per acre. I remember when it used to be 1 parking place per unit, excuse me. And I remember when it used to be 2 parking spaces per unit. But when you think about any apartment in town, just whoever's living there, there's 2 cars. Because if you have a married couple, they both work. Or you have a couple of friends renting the apartment, there's 2 cars. So the ordinance might say 1 car per unit, but in reality, there's going to be 2 cars per unit trying to park there. And there is no place for the snow to go unless they're planning to just remove the snow every time it storms. But I share the previous person's concerns about the parking.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Please come forward.
My name's Ann Blodgett, and I live at, I own 28 Pleasant Street. It's a wonderful residential area. I have 1 question that I'd like to ask the board. It's my understanding that you're not a housing commission, but I heard Attorney Marbury talk about, we need more rental properties and so forth. I mean, I don't think that's really should be part of the discussion here. So I just wanted to make that point. I think there's plenty of places where rental properties can go.
North Main Street is a beautiful gateway. As for barn usage, the town offers a barn easement program for tax reduction because we're trying to save barns. We're trying to save them historically, not to amend them into apartments. I'm very concerned about the density, the precedent, the density precedent. Every time I've driven by that property, all the parking lots are filled, and there's no other. It's a quarter of an acre. It's just mind-boggling visually to me. If we start setting that precedent on North Main, Wolfeboro's going to lose a beautiful gateway, and the townspeople have said we need to maintain what's beautiful and historic here. So I really wanted to make that point. As for all the technicalities, I think there's always a way to slide something in there, but the visual impact and the traffic impact and the lot coverage and density have to be really looked at as bad precedent. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak in opposition to the application? Mr. Marbury, would you like to speak again in rebuttal?
Just very briefly. It's really important that it be emphasized that the parking requirements are met. You know, and we can all have a different opinion about what we should do. And I've had honest and frank conversations with my clients about they're going to need to, in their lease, restrict parking, and tenants are going to need to know what that is. But that's something we can do by contract. We all deal with those kinds of issues all the time. It meets the parking requirements, and so an objection based on parking is really not a valid objection under the zoning ordinance because we satisfy it. One of the realities that I tried to emphasize here, and it's addressing the idea of setting a precedent, we don't have to be too concerned with precedent when it comes to this specific approach with variances, because the specific thing that we're dealing with are the special circumstances of each unique property, each situation. Yes, there is a significant difference between a single-family home that has a barn and their ability to use that barn for all kinds of purposes, right? And a multifamily building that's already a multifamily building with a barn. They're just not the same issues that they face. And so it is the specific and special circumstances of this property that warrant the variance that we are requesting. And so I just want to kind of make that very clear. I understand and I appreciate the comments that have been made, but I don't think that they're concerns that we need to be worried about. Again, you know, at the same time, the issue of wanting to preserve this barn was raised, but the reality is without an economically viable way to do that, we're going to continue to see barns go away. You know, and the other proposal was that we tear it down to add parking, and my clients nor I think that that's a good solution to this problem. And so we want to reiterate again, we fully acknowledge that the population density, that's why we're here, because we're seeking a variance from that. That is what the property does not comply with. We are then also seeking that conditional variance of the distance between the buildings, unless the board should agree with me that it's grandfathered and no variance is required. But you know, we're not trying to hide our cards here. We as Matt has referenced, we meet the parking requirements. We don't run afoul of the 4 units per building requirement, and so we have sought a variance for the 2 sections of the zoning ordinance that we do believe need to be accepted in order for my clients to build this 2 units. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? I'll close the public hearing and I'll open our discussion amongst ourselves. Comments? Discussion?
I agree with the parking. It's going to be a lot of cars, but if it meets the spec of the town, nothing you can do. Pre-existing, the 2 houses next to each other, the house and the barn, 100 years old, nothing you can do. It's the density thing that has me. And if it's supposed to be 2 units per acre, and we're looking at, we have 4 and we're going to 6, Attorney Marbury talked about setting precedent. I think you open that can of worms, I think it's going to be tough.
Other comments? There?
Yes, I have to say that I'm in line with Tim as regards the parking. The parking may not be adequate, we may know that, but that is moot because of our regulations, and it meets our regulations. And then about the distance between the buildings, I think somewhat reluctantly, I have to agree that neither one of those buildings were recently built. So I would think that it would be grandfathered, but I also have concern about things like that because of fire suppression and ability for the fire department to even address a fire when they can't get even themselves hardly between those two buildings, never mind a ladder truck getting up through in there because of the parking and the constriction of the lot and on the buildings taking up such a great portion. And I see that we require 1 acre for 2 units. We have a 1/4 acre and 4 units exist there. I just don't know how we could ever justify putting 6 units on 0.264 acres when you look at what the density is for that area.
Thank you.
And can I just add one other?
Sorry.
Just add one other thing. I'm sorry, I hesitated. I don't think that this could be confiscatory in any way because you talk about highest and best use of the property. It may not be the best use, but I think 4 units on a 1/4 acre where you need 1 acre for 2 units is definitely about as high as you can go.
Thank you. Thank you. Luke, do you want to comment, or I usually go last?
I can go last. I was just the one point I was going to bring up is that if the board is with the density, and with the best use of the barn going forward, and maybe this is a question for Matt, but could the board approve 1 additional unit?
You may note that in our opinion from council, it actually preemptively asked just that question. The board cannot choose to approve 5 units rather than the 6 that are required. What could be done is the applicants could presumably submit a new request at a later time for what would be considered a substantially different request, but the board doesn't have that authority as part of its vote tonight.
Thank you. As I review the various criteria, I have some concerns with at least 2 of them. Our zoning sets a fairly high standard for the number of units per acre. I do acknowledge that we take into consideration the current as-built area in the downtown area of Wolfeboro. There are other units, but not many, where there is a higher density. As I recall, maybe Mr. Hausman was disagreeing with that, but let's say it's not much more dense than this proposal. However, I think the difference here is that this property already had a variance or had a special exception to go to 4. Going to 6 on the grounds that there is no other use for a barn seems to me to be not sustainable. I think I don't see that not granting this variance does harm to the public interest. I think the other struggle I have is with special conditions. I don't really see that this parcel has any special conditions. It has a barn. Just from driving up and down the street and from some testimony here tonight, there are many other structures in Wolfeboro that have barns. I don't see that the need to grant 2 residential units in every barn is the appropriate way to handle a way of preserving barns. If that's what's desired, I think that we need a change to the zoning laws to allow that. I do agree that parking is not the issue here, no matter what we think of the ordinance, and I'm sure that this lots of people who disagree on lots of ordinances. The ordinance says this is what we need to do. The ordinance, we do meet the requirements there. So my feeling is I would be not in favor of granting the variance because I don't think it shows special conditions of this property, and I don't think that literal enforcement of the provisions would result in an unnecessary hardship because I don't see special conditions. Any other discussion here?
Could I just add something to what you were saying about relative to the barns? One of the things that have proliferated over the past years are storage units. We have several of them right on 28 up on 109A. And we've heard some testimony tonight about what people use barns for. And I would think that if you wanted to preserve the barn, that you know, you've got 4 apartments there. I can't believe that those 4 apartments don't need some kind of storage, and there's been some issues about construction of something to hold a trash area in, and I know I believe at the last meeting relative to that. So I guess I have to agree with you that there are other uses for a barn than this. The density thing is the one I just can't get past. I don't believe it meets. And I don't believe that we could, that any substantial justice would be done because they've already gone above and beyond the saturation point.
Any other comments? I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion to deny the application as presented for the reasons stated. Oh, wait a minute, Matt.
One note, you do have 2 variance applications in front of you, so I would recommend 2 votes on the separate provisions.
Thank you. We're going to deal with this one first, and we're going to talk about. Is there a second to Sarah's motion?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yep.
Okay. The second variance is a request to permit the separation between the 2 buildings to continue.
Isn't that a moot point at this point?
Is it moot because if it's a storage use, there is no need for...
Functionally, if the density isn't granted for the multifamily use, you're preserving the existing use and it is a grandfathered structure. But I would recommend that you either, you can simply deny without prejudice or something to that effect based on the other denial.
I'd make that motion then to deny it without prejudice for the building being closer than 20 feet.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Will the clerk read the notice of meeting for the second item?
Case number 04-V-19, application of Sky Ridge Farm Condominiums. Public hearing for a variance of Article 12, Section 175-80 of the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to allow for the construction of a 2-car garage within the side setback. This property is located at 2 Farmhouse Lane. Site visit will be held, or was held, today at 4:15, attended by Fred Tedeschi, Tim Cronin, and Sarah Silk. It would be noted that the applicant did not come to the site visit.
Thank you. We believe that a site visit here, at least I believe that a site visit here is essential. When we looked at the property, we were unable to determine where the structure was going to be. We waited till approximately 4:40 and no one showed up. There were some stakes there, but we couldn't tell whether they were for garages or for cutting trees. So unless there's any further discussion, I'd like to move that we adjourn this meeting till next month to a day certain. Do we have the date of the April meeting? April 1st? Do we want to hold on April Fools? Yes, I know you're not responsible for the calendar. So we adjourn it to a day certain, to April 1st, and we will renotice the the site visit so that we'll set a new site time for the... Yeah.
In the event that you do continue this case to the April meeting, I am not familiar with your past practice about allowing presentation of the application premature to that site visit. Do you ever entertain that? I only ask that because we do have some members from the association here tonight. And I don't want to promote the idea. I'm just not sure what the board's practice has been.
If we continue the application, we're going to have to reopen the public hearing.
Correct.
So those who attend the public hearing the next time would have to hear the application again in order to have a fair presentation. My thought. Colleagues may disagree here. We were at the site, but
Okay.
So the owners are saying that they were present on the property, but were not aware of the fact that they had to attend the site visit.
Fred.
yes, Sarah.
We were there for at least 20 minutes, and that was after the appointed time. And for whatever reason, the person that was supposed to represent the association was, for whatever reason, unable to attend. And I just think it's just not practical to go into the application at all tonight until we do the viewing. People are going to have to come back. So, excuse me, you don't have the floor, ma'am?
I'll open the public hearing for the purpose of hearing your comment and any other comments, but I'm not going to take testimony on the application itself. So, ma'am, if you'd like to come forward.
And if I could just address procedurally, our letters that go to the applicants on the case say that the presence of the site walk is... So who was the applicant, the actual applicant on the application? That's the critical difference. So someone, okay, so Dan, someone is recommended to be, Robin? So those two letters that go out are unique in that they require you to be present for the site visit, or they strongly encourage it.
Got it. That's him.
So
right?
that's I think the issue that the board is discussing. What's that?
I guess I'm saying the same as strongly encouraged.
Yep.
Not required.
Mm-hmm.
So if we weren't there, I can't say it was required. Strongly encouraged. We have a plan.
What does the letter say?
The verbatim is advisable. Advisable is what the letters say that go to the applicants on the case. They do not require presence at the site visit.
I don't think I've ever gone to a site visit before where no one was present.
Right, and I just think we have a disagreement between practice and what the materials say. It's not in the board's rules and procedures that we require it, so it's not in our materials that we send out. I recognize it's not the practice of the board, but I just want to point that out because I think we do have folks here tonight, and I recognize the board may not be willing to hear the case, but I just think we want to make it clear to them.
I think to add a little clarity on the proposed map, there were two proposed garages on that. Mm-hmm. On that map. We don't know which one they were looking for. The one we did see behind a snow pile where there was a stone wall, we saw 3 stakes in there. We're not sure if those were property lines or if they were where a garage was supposed to be. So to hear the case and not know where it's going to go, that's the reason for the site visit.
Please use the microphone, sir.
Sorry, I'm David May. I'm in Unit 5. I get it. It's really unfortunate because I was sitting at home while you were out there.
Did you see us, sir?
No, I didn't.
Oh,
you know, I'm surprised if you drove in and drove down there that my dog didn't bark, but he didn't. And, you know, it's a shame.
And we parked right around the circle. We had 3 cars there and
Yeah.
walked around. It was kind of hard to see, and then we looked back in the woods even further and we saw some additional markers.
So the part you were seeing by the rock, well, you can't see the rock wall anymore because it's all covered with snow.
Right.
That's a garage that requires no variance, it just requires a building permit because it's within, it's outside the wetlands. It doesn't need any special exemptions. It's the garage that's down all the way to the end that buffers into the wetlands and it buffers into the property line. And, we have an elderly resident. I have a letter from her stating why she would request that that garage be located down there. And so we were all teed up. The only problem is that none of us realized we needed to be out there. If I'd known you were there, I would have been able to show you everything and we'd be better off tonight. I guess I worry, Matt, about, we also have to, we're teed up to do the special exemption with the wetlands, and is this going to be not enough time in between? So we're going to be pushed out into May.
So it actually, what Mr. May is referring to is that this does require a special use permit for wetland impact and a site plan review application at the planning board level. So it actually doesn't create a time conflict, because if you are heard by the board on the 1st, you would then be at the April 2nd planning board meeting. We hear those sort of sequential applications very often. So it's more of an issue of attendance at the meeting, but practically there won't be any delay to your other applications as a result of this continuance that sounds like the board is entertaining tonight. I just wanted to make it clear to you folks why they're doing what they're doing. So it wouldn't delay your other plans that are currently in front of the boards.
Yes, may I ask Dan Coons a question?
Yeah, sure.
Are you able to attend a site viewing on April 1st, Dan?
Yes, I'll make sure that I can be there. I have to apologize for not being aware that advisable was necessary. So that's...
We didn't even look in the right place.
So
we weren't,
Yep.
We were lost.
Yep.
We weren't even
My
warned.
apologies.
No, we were not
I've got
warned.
the plans with me, if that helps. I've got full-size plans. If you'd like to look at it, I'd be happy to describe it. But if you want to wait until April 1st, I don't want to make you angry. So
My personal view is I need to, I can look at plans, but unless I actually have a relation to something that I can see, it's difficult for me to conceive of where it is.
Sure, understood.
And I'm sorry that we had a failure of communication here or whatever it was, but I think we owe it to the townspeople who put their trust in us to actually see what's going to happen and to see if there's any extra things that we need. Sometimes we require measurements from the corner to a spot that we know so that we can see where it's actually going to go, and we know where we're giving permission to allow something to happen.
I'll work at getting it staked out before the next, before April 1st also.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
I would make it clear that we should amend our administrative documents to reflect the fact that we'd like to require site visits for all applications rather than simply as a recommended piece of the application process. I would just point out that the ZBA is required to consider applications within a certain time of receiving a complete application. So I would recommend that you seek the applicant's consent to continue the application, because I'm not sure that a site visit is an element, is a specific element of a complete application. With that said, their application may be ripe for appeal if they would choose to proceed without it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I think you have to agree with the folks that are applying that they think it's in their best interest to continue it, because I don't think it's a part of our completeness application, and therefore the clock has started on the application.
Mr. Coons, is that okay with you, sir?
So what I'm basically saying is that under state law, the application is required to be heard by the ZBA within a certain period of time from when you file it. I would argue that you potentially have the right to have the appeal heard tonight, but it probably is not in your best interest, as it would increase the ripeness for appeal or something of that sort, right? So what I'm saying is that the board, in my opinion, has to get consent from you to actually continue this application out to a later time, because a site visit is not a required part of the application and is really a suggested part of the application. So I believe that you should consent to continue, but it is ultimately up to you. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I think it's just important to point out that it's not a requirement of completeness.
Your point is well taken. Thank you.
But they run the risk of a denial if we feel we don't have enough information. And I think you should advise them of that as well.
Certainly.
Okay, so, you know, sorry for the disconnect. I think legally we could require you to hear our application tonight. We've already checked with council, but we want this to go and we want to get there, so we don't want to cause problems. So we'll push this out as long as you give us this time frame to allow us to come back and present our case for this variance.
An adjournment would do that. Continuance would do that, yes.
Okay, so
And Matt, we're correct in understanding a continuation does not require any re-notification, so they... Oh, wait a minute. I can't hear you.
The site visit itself, we don't have a time for. We're dealing with the time change now, so the zoning board moves their site visits up prior to the ZBA meeting. We don't know what applications are coming in conjunction with April 1st, so we could send them a letter specifically giving them the time.
Matt, why can't we just determine that on April 1st we're going to see Dan Coons at 4 o'clock and put that in as part of our continuation motion?
You can. You can.
Perfect.
It's a Monday.
We always meet on a Monday.
So it'll be 4 o'clock on the 1st
For the viewing.
for the site view.
And then
Okay.
back here at 7 o'clock.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
I move that we continue this hearing until 7 o'clock on Monday, April 1st in the Great Hall, and that a site visit be scheduled for 4 p.m. on Monday, April 1st.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you for your cooperation on that.
We greatly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. When you're talking about revising that paperwork, would it be fair to say that it would probably indicate that at least one representative should be present?
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct. Yep. And we do leave it up to the applicant. It either says your authorized agent or the applicant or the owner.
Correct.
So we do have some flexibility, but we can say that.
Okay, we have minutes of the meeting of February 4th for review. You're all welcome to stay for our discussions, but we will not be offended if you don't. Thank you all, and we appreciate your being cooperative on this, and we look forward to seeing where the garage site is going to be. And maybe there'll be a little bit less snow so we can get a better look.
I hope so.
With a little bit less snow, perhaps we could even park out of the middle of the road in front when we go to view it.
Thank you.
It's not, though.
No. Page 1. In looking at this, I noticed that it seems like the language from the planner's menu has been picked up, and some of the language just doesn't seem to belong in an application summary. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down near the right-hand margin. I expect there will be discussion of available parking on site. I don't think that sentence belongs in there. There are, and next to the last line, my interpretation of the ordinance. There's quite a few of these on page 2. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to pick that up from there, but I think we have to do a little editing. So maybe we want to hold this to our next meeting, and we can have a, yeah.
Do you need a motion to?
I don't think we do.
No.
You don't have, great, okay.
If you want, I can give you my pencil markup. I'm not sure it's right, but
It would help her.
it's okay. Any other business?
No, I just had notation. I was confused by some of that.
Our names are all spelled correctly. That's what we look.
Hey, it's not time.
Speaking of time, any other business come before the meeting? If not,
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you all.
Thank you.